Good afternoon, YouTube viewers. It's very spectacular to be seeing you here once again. We're just in the process right now of installing the 6-inch rough country lift on this 1989 C1500 two-wheel drive. Apparently you can fit some 35s into this beast once it's all said and done. And I must warn you, just off the start, in case you're thinking of doing this, you can't fit your stock rims under this lift once you install it. Because these spindles here, they get a bit more diameter to them, and your stock rims won't work. So you're gonna have to have something with a bit more back spacing and internal width. You know what I mean? So here's one side installed. I put new ball joints while I'm there. You know, I would suggest you do the same. Also tie rod end. You know, because you remove it with a pickle fork, and it pretty much just ruins the rubber. You know, so. It gives you a 3-inch drop spindle and a 3-inch spring, which adds another altogether 6 inches of lift, in case you don't know mathematics. Then you get a new shock and whatever else, you know. The back's some blocks, 4-inch blocks. So I'm going to show you the process of doing the other side here. I haven't started yet. So the first thing I'm going to do, guys, is remove this hub nut and then remove the caliper. It's a 3/8 hex drive in the back of this, 2 bolts, and I'll come back to it once that's all completed. Once you get to this stage in the game, everyone's looking at you like you're Dominic Toretto unleashed, because you get parts all over the damn floor. But we're not even there yet, as you would know. Figured I'd press play so you can watch me when I'm hard at work. Right now I'm actually just removing the tie rod end. So it's a 17 mil nut, as I said before. I removed that, but I still kept the nut on there because I'm going to be ramming the threads out of the spindle. So you just take your good old trusty hammer and go Bob the Builder mode. Here we go. She's out, my friends, just like that. Watch and learn. Prepare to become best friends with your buzz wheel on this session, because if you're like me and you're dealing with a good amount of rust here, this sway bar bolt's not coming undone, and I got new end links on both sides, so we're just gonna cut that. Say goodnight, Irene. Unfortunately, I broke the wheel, but you know what I mean? That's what happens when you're a bit of a newbie yourself. There we go. So I'm gonna save the rest of that sway bar end link for dessert, but for now, I'm gonna eat my dinner, which is these ball joint bolts. Really what's left of them anyways. On the other side, I was being a little Neanderthal, and I was trying to take the cotter pins out for like 2 hours, until my next door neighbor Tim, he gave me a very smart idea. He said to drill out the cotter pins, and that took all of 5 minutes. So learn from my mistakes. At that point, you'll be able to take this pickle fork, put it in between the ball joint and the spindle, and then ram the hammer on this side, and at that point your spindle will come free. As you can see, the spindle is now removed from the upper and lower control arm. And at this point, I'm just going to put the nut slightly back on this bottom ball joint, take the biggest hammer I got, and just Fred Flintstone the shit out of that thing till it finally pops out. Don't try this at home, kids. That's how it's done, huh? Now that we have the lower ball joint removed, it's time to get the upper out. And as you can tell, those bolts are also quite rusty. Perhaps they're even welded there, that's how rusted they are. And I'm just gonna try to remove them, but if not, I'll just take the buzz wheel and just cut them off. Upper ball joint's now removed, and I just decided to use the zip wheel for it because those bolts were just, they looked like they went through the trenches of World War II. And so the trick is to just use a small cutoff wheel because you can get in some tight crevices that way, you know? And at this point, I'm very dirty and very hungry. So I'm gonna go eat some dinner, and I'll see you folks tomorrow. It's Wednesday morning, and it's quite early. I don't want to be using power tools right now because I don't want to upset any of my glorious neighbors. But for right now, the plan is to remove this shock, this spring, and then once everybody wakes up, then I can buzz this sway bar end link off. I'm gonna buzz this guy off. I believe it's a steering stop. Rough Country tells you to take that off. And then this bump stop I'll remove. But for right now, the first bolt I'm gonna attack is this shock mount right there. Here's the difference between the aftermarket and the stock spring. As you can tell, this one's thicker and has more coils on it. But the funny part is they're the exact same height. So I'm thinking that the main purpose of it is to remove sag and add some stiffness to your suspension. Just the way we like it here at Rough Country. Everything's now removed. And watch your hands when you're taking that spring out, because I did in fact get a little bit pinched. And especially when you play guitar like me, whoa, that's a scary time. But I'm dealing with a problem now that I dealt with on the other side, and that's that the lower shock bolts, the tips break right off them, you know? So as you can see right there, it's a bit of a messy time. So what my plan is, and this is what I did on the other side that worked gloriously, is to, I just already cleaned up this nut here that I just tightened on with a ratchet. I cleaned that up with a wire wheel brush, and then now I'm gonna just cut a little slit in it, and then I'm gonna fill that slit with weld, and hopefully be able to remove that 12 mil out the top like that. Let's give it a test run. So now you just fill this up with weld. Right inside the crevice. Alright. Now we're gonna wait a good 10 minutes for it to cool down, and then I'm gonna hit it with some PB blaster, and we're gonna try to crank that out. I gotta say, it's quite amazing what a little bit of black spray paint can do for you. But I got all the old parts finally removed here. Those two lower shock bolts were quite a pain, so make sure you prepare for a little bit of enjoyment on that. There's one of them, my weld trick worked on it, but unfortunately the other one I had to drill out, and it was quite a painful process. And at this point, guys, my first thing I'm gonna do here, this is a big time recommendation that I learned from the other side. Okay, so you're gonna wanna cut this guy right here. I just put a bunch of zits in it like this, and then I just hammer it back. Because trust me when I say, trying to get your new spring in without that cut, you're gonna have yourself a really hard time. Alright boys, don't forget that step. If you don't do this, you're gonna have an extremely hard time getting a new spring into place. Oh, look what we stumbled upon, the new tie rod and adjustment sleeve. So this is gonna make it much easier for my legendary mechanic Maz to do the alignment on it. He's not gonna have much of a hard time turning those bolts, I'll tell you that much. Here's the new upper ball joint, and also Rough Country, they give you a little spacer here. So that's gonna sandwich in between your upper control arm and your ball joint. And that's gonna fix your camber levels, so you're not looking like Mr. Zeekster when you're driving down the road. And then those are your bolts that you're gonna be putting blue Loctite on, and you're gonna be cranking those guys down to 35 foot-pounds. Now it's time for the second hardest part of the install, which is pressing this ball joint into this lower control arm. So you're gonna need a press set, and they look like this. And I'll tell you, the only difficulty that I had on the other side is that due to the fact that I only have about 1.5 feet of ground clearance here, I can't get an impact gun on the bottom. So I'll show you my technique. Alright boys, this is what your setup's gonna look like. And just to let you know in advance, they are a bit notorious for going in sideways. So just pay attention at all times. And since I can't fit an impact in that little 3 inches of space, I'm gonna have to go Fred Flintstone mode and break out the old cheater bar. So it's the end of day 2, and this is how we're looking. On Friday, I'll be installing the coil spring and obviously the shock. And then it's going to be time to bolt the spindle on and say goodnight, Irene. She's complete. So it's day 3 on the job, and I must say, get ready to sketch yourself out because you're going to start using spring compressors. But this is not any little fucking Honda Civic with the tiny springs, okay? As you can see, they're jumbo. But you can't use heavy duty spring compressors because they're just too big for the small crevice that it needs to fit into. So there's 3 problems you're gonna run into, okay, when you're trying to use these things. First of all, they're too long, so you gotta cut them shorter. Second of all, you can't put the lower end of it too low to compress more of it because these nuts are gonna be impossible to turn because they're gonna be hitting the lower control arm on the edges here. And third of all, you can't put this side of it too high because if you put these ears too high, then they hit the inside of this crevice here. Believe it or not, this spring is about as compressed as I want it. You know it's starting to get a little sketcheroo when you're looking at your friggin' threads and they're bending just a bit, you know? So I don't feel like dying today. We're gonna attempt to fit it in here now. It's better to have somebody else with you so they can put their foot on this lower control arm and push it down. Otherwise you gotta practice yoga a lot in order to get the right angles for your body. So I got a lot luckier on this side than I did on the other side. And as you can see, the spring's into place as well as the shock. And the shock's bolted up, so just as a safety precaution. So now it's time to put the spindle in place once I unwind these spring compressors. It's definitely the best feeling of the whole friggin' build right now. Once you've gotten to this stage, my friends, give yourself a nice little pat on the back because you deserve it, eh? As you can see, we got the cotter pins through and they're both torqued down. And at this point now, you're gonna put your rotor back on with the wheel bearings and your caliper. So this is what your front end's gonna look like when she's all said and done. As you can see, tie rod's all bolted up. And I tried to align it the best I could for now before I actually hit the alignment shop. Rotor's on, obviously, caliper, everything's torqued. And you don't need extended brake lines because there's this little bracket here. I just bolted it to the frame a bit lower. So just remove it, it's at the top of the frame and bolt it a bit lower. And as you can see, there's lots of slack here and this is obviously fully extended. So looks pretty seductive. So now we're gonna get started on the rear. First thing I'm gonna do, now that she's jacked up properly, is unbolt these rusty old shocks. So I must admit, those shock bolts were extremely rusty, so I just ended up cutting them out. Like I said, prepare to become best friends with your angle grinder. And at this point, from what's obvious to the eye, I'm gonna be putting in this block now in between the leaf spring and the axle. So it's pretty self-explanatory. Crank her down, crank her down. Folks, make sure to use something like this ARP fastener lubricant for the threads of your U-bolts, because I'll tell you one of two things. If they're either dirty or they're not lubed up, you can have an extremely hard time cranking those things. And as you can see, look at me, Neanderthal mode, using a ratchet. I can't believe it, eh? I know all you pro mechanics are gonna be using a impact gun. I tried it, trust me. But make sure, don't forget this. Well, folks, the shocks are in. And the blocks are in. And as you can obviously see, the tires are on. So, I reveal to you the 6-inch lift by Rough Country for the 88 to 98 C1500. In case you're wondering what kind of tires I got here, these are 35 12.5 R15 Mickey Thompson Baja Boss, and these are some used Baja claws. Still gotta go for the alignment, so I get the shitty tires in the front. And anyways, let me just do a little walk around for you folks, so you can start to get a little bit aroused in case you feel like doing this yourself. They included that Rough Country sticker there on the top. Pretty spicy. I got a little bit of body work to do this summer, but that's part of the enjoyment. I did have to trim this little front bumper here, plastic piece. I don't mind that at all. And anyways guys, don't forget to enjoy yourselves. Hope you enjoyed the VidCon. And Big Chris signing out.